Thank you so much. We are going to go now from competitions in the classroom to the great outdoors and hear from our next speaker, Amelia Westerman, who works as a community engagement officer. Hi, everyone. How's it going? I'm Amelia. As Giselle said, I work in local government at the environment centres as a community engagement officer. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how I think geography relates to the work that we do there, which took a really long time for me to think about. When you're doing your work day to day, you sort of don't really sit down and think about these big questions like you did when you were in uni. So then the past couple of nights, I was like, oh, I'm being led into all these directions about what it could mean. And I was like, what do you think of this, to my brother? And he was like, you've gone too far. Like, you need to just focus and pick a specific thing. And I was like, okay. So I'm sorry if it's a little bit rambly and all over the place tonight, because this is the journey I went on when I was thinking about the topic of geography in the community. And I was like, whoa. So yes, the work that I do as a community engagement officer is really about using our visitor centres as a place to build connection between our community and their local environment. So I think of it as an intermediary zone between being out in the surrounding environment and being in the comfort of the outdoors. So to me, this is sort of the stepping stones. I like to think of it as stepping stones to sort of being indoors in a space that sort of very obviously connects to the idea of being outside, to then this sort of what I call like the lawn classic park sort of layout that you often get at our visitor centres, to then the actual reserve where you can really get in touch with nature. And so for a lot of people who come to the reserves, there are varying levels of confidence, varying degrees of knowledge and confidence in being outside even and in the great outdoors. And so I think having this sort of format and having these visitor centres that are attached to these reserves is really important for that, because for some people, this is going to be the first time that they've even thought about going into a reserve, which is really exciting for us because we're like, oh, we're going to get you out of your comfort zone. But yeah, so that's sort of represents that journey. So for this challenge of building connection and understanding, and by generating curiosity, we turn to geography. And I think that these three phrases articulate the why really well. These are not my phrases. I have stolen these shamelessly from the National Geographical Society, Royal Geographical Society of the UK and National Geographic. So the first one is, geography provides an ideal framework for relating other fields of knowledge. And this is really important for us and the work we do, because people are coming to us from all sorts of backgrounds, like I was saying, and different motivations. So we really need to work from every possible avenue to try to appeal to these different people. So an example is we have people coming there often for activities for 3 to 5 year olds. We have people coming there from migrant backgrounds who haven't grown up having this experience of being outside and having this space where it's for that purpose, dedicated for that purpose. And then we have people who the environment is their entire life. They're there with their whole hiking gear. They've got the sticks. It's just a flat walk, like it's 2K, but they're ready to go. They've got the hat on. They're there every weekend. We see them. There are regulars, and it's there for those people as well. And so, yeah, geography is a really great framework for that, for relating to all these different people and meeting them where they're at. And we've recognized that that's really important when you're trying to teach people about having some sensitivity towards the environment to build that environmental consciousness. You really have to meet them where they're at rather than trying to impose on them your own values. Which leads me to number 2. Thinking geographically helps people to be aware of the connections among and between places and to see how important events are shaped by where they take place. Because how can we ask people to care enough to make changes in their lives if they don't know about these connections? And so that's sort of what I thought of when we thought about the idea of using geography as a framework for engaging with the community. It's about helping them to see those links, helping people to realize that these things are linked, that the life you live at home and day to day is actually linked to the entire world around you. And while that might not seem obvious or might not be front of mind all the time, it is actually a very real connection that's always impacting you, and you're always impacting the world. So I guess we sort of operate from that space too, is reminding people like, you impact this place and this is a place for you as well. Which leads me to number 3, which is the outcome that we're hoping for, which is that learning through geography, whether gained through formal learning or experientially through travel, fieldwork and expeditions, which is a lot of what we do at the centres, helps us all to be more socially and environmentally sensitive, better informed and more responsible as citizens and employees. So part of what gets me particularly excited about this idea of geography changing people for the better stems from my own experience, because while I believe in the impact that our environment centres have on people based on the reactions we've had and the feedback that we get from our visitors, I think of my own experience with geography and with the environment as a sort of longitudinal study of how developing someone's understanding of the world and their place in it can build their empathy for that world. So I sort of have seen through my own journey with it, and it's come a long way. So I'm going to try and explain that to you with this. So when I was a little kid, I would tell my aunt when we would go on holidays that I had no legs when we would walk places, and then I would beg her to carry me because I had no legs, because walking was not something that appealed to me at all. Neither was cycling or riding bikes or going outside or swimming in the ocean or going on big walks, all the things that my dad really, really tried to sort of encourage me and my siblings to go and do, but we totally were not for it. And partially, I think that's because my mum grew up in the city in Indonesia, and in her childhood, you didn't spend time really recreationally in nature like you did when you were really little, like playing around in creeks and things. But as you got older and older, those just weren't spaces that you went into. And there weren't places where you met people socially or did activities with someone. And today, I think there's probably a little bit more of that, but it's still something that I see, like with my own cousins and things, that it's not really, it's different. It's not like here where we regularly often go to those things after work, during work, you know, after school, that sort of thing on the weekends. And so I've sort of started from this space of not really enjoying these things and not really wanting to be out there in nature, not seeing it as something that was appealing at all. So time skip to high school, and a timetable clash led me to swap my modern history subject for geography. And thus my first real look at geography began. And at this point in high school, I liked animals and I understood this sort of inherent value of nature. But it wasn't something that I particularly felt strongly about. It's not like if someone was like, oh, do you want to go and do a protest on the weekend? I wouldn't be like, yeah, let's go. I'd be like, you enjoy yourself. And it's the same with someone was like, oh, do you want to go camping, or do you want to go walk on the beach or go to the forest? I'd be like, that sounds like you're going to have heaps of fun without me. And if I did do those activities, it really was because of the social element that appealed to me, not the nature element at all. And so in high school, my understanding of geography looked a lot like this. And I think that seeing the geography competition really just threw me back, especially the question on longshore drift. I was like, I have a question. I have a little image of longshore drift up there, because that's definitely something that stood out to me about my high school experience of geography. It was definitely fun, and we learned about development and cities and landscapes and sustainability matrices. But it never really occurred to me just how broad the field was. What did appeal to me about it, and part of what made me further pursue geography in university, was the beginning of this feeling of empowerment that with just enough understanding of the different elements that influence a space, and without having to be an expert on just one specific topic, you could start to envision what changes could be made to that space to create positive experiences for people and the environment. And that was really exciting for me. So we learned a bit about planning a park. I think that was one of the assignments we had. We learned about, you know, development of the Gold Coast, and we learned about what decision making we would do if we were working with developers in government and that sort of thing. And that was really exciting to me, because as a kid, I was never specifically interested in very specific topics like biology or about all of these different things. So feeling like I could learn about this but still be interested in lots of things really appealed to me. And then in uni, geography really opened up for me, and it started to look like this. I started to realize that I didn't have to narrow my focus with geography. Every other subject that I did, whether that was ecology, sociology, paleobotany, psychology, all of those contributed to me having a better understanding of the different forces that have shaped and continue to shape our spaces and our world. And that was really, really exciting to me. I was also lucky enough during this time to make some really great friends through geography. And those people also really helped me to push me out of my comfort zone and build my passion for the environment. Sorry, Dad, that it wasn't you, but he just had a way of pushing me, as parents do, forcibly into doing it. It just didn't appeal the way that it does when your friends are like, oh, hey, want to come for a walk? And you're like, all right. And slowly that's how you build that passion. And to me, this is also why the visitor centres that we operate are so important, because for the people who visit who don't have those people who are pushing them out of their boundaries, we sort of facilitate that experience for them at the environment centres. You know, we're the ones who are like, oh, hi, do you want to come and see this worm in a worm farm? And it's like, you don't have to touch it, but maybe you might like to start to have a look at it. And this is sort of what these things look like, and sort of starting to facilitate that understanding as well, but at the pace of the person rather than trying to speed up that journey unnecessarily. So time skip now to having worked 3 years in our environment centres. And I'm surprised by how much I've grown in my environmental consciousness purely through informal learning and positive experiences in nature, reinforced by the people who work with me who are passionate about nature themselves, but from different viewpoints. So I choose to go out in nature now because I actually like it and actually look forward to it. And while that isn't the outcome that we expect everyone who visits us to sort of achieve, it's like I said, it's about pushing them to look that little bit further outside of themselves, and at the things that connect them to the world around them. So this is me on a bike ride with my team out in the wetlands. It was pouring rain. I hate cycling. I still don't like cycling, but because they were there and because it was fun, it was all of us, and I knew these wetlands, it became that thing of like, yeah, no, I'm going to try it. And it was really, really fun, actually. But yeah, so this is something that I see us do and facilitate in our programs, like our nature journaling workshops, which are as much about learning about the practice of nature journaling, for example, as they are about making people see their local reserves as more than just trees and rocks, but places for them to build a relationship with and become invested in. The same can be said for programs like our Bush Kindy, which is for 3 to 5 year olds, which invites children and their guardians to participate in fun craft and games that are related to nature and animals and insects and plants and often take place outside. We are inviting them to become more familiar with the space through lots of different avenues, whether that's through books, because we often read a story and it'll be environmental, weather, or it'll be related in some sort of way to exploration of that space, or things like games and craft as a way of building that connection. And so in this one on the far left, we're doing a scavenger hunt with some tiny, tiny kitties in our pollinator garden. The middle one is some nature journaling that we did at Tui Forest. And then on the far corner is Bush Kindy again during a very rainy day. We still had people turn up, and we were looking at trees and textures and touching things and poking mud, and it was good fun. So to summarize all of that, I think that geography serves as a mechanism for people to have a reason to care and to care enough to make changes, and in the best case scenario, become stewards and advocates for their environment, because building their understanding of the connections that exist between their life at home and the life they live out in the world with other people and the world itself builds empathy, and that's what we aim to achieve through the work that we do, engaging with community. Thanks. I don't know whether I'm supposed to do questions now or later, if there are any. Okay, if you have one. Oh, yes. Mohammed, we'll let you in. Okay, so now, any questions? Otherwise, I'll creep away. Yes.
So you mentioned a few of the activities here, the Bush Kindy, the nature journaling. What would you say kind of your like dominant age group is that you see through nature centers? Is there sort of one that is larger than the others, or is it very spread across ages?
I'd say for me, it's easiest to spot who's not there. So I think the demographic that's not there the most is probably from like 18 to like 25 or even like early 30s. We don't often see that group of people coming through. We see families. We have a lot of aged care group come through. We have disability care groups come through. We have kindergartens and like childcare. Lots of families, but we miss a lot of that young people. We have a lot of retirees. We have some really epic walking groups that come in like consistently, and there are these big walking groups that come past. We have, especially at our south side, we have like a lot of the migrant community come along, and they'll wave to us and speak in their language and then walk past, and they're off doing their own thing. A lot of them have their own like dedicated groups that they regularly walk with, or we have a group that sings choir, like sings hymns outside, and sometimes people who play music, like we had someone jamming out on the saxophone, which is crazy and awesome. We sort of get, a really big mix, but I think that I'm always surprised if I see someone around my own age, because I'm like, hello, like, what are you doing here? Like, it's nice to see that, but I think that that's the demographic that maybe feels the least comfortable being there. And I think that's just because the centres, our activities are sort of family centric. And so often people are coming there because they have a family and they want to spend time with them there. Yeah.
Cool. So in terms of the service, do you work at like fixed places or do you move?
I move.
Around?
So me and my team, we have a roster and we move between our 3 environment centres.
Right. So they're only at the environment centre that you do what you do.
Yes and no. So we do a lot of offsite activities. We work at like Green Heart Fair, for example, when that's on around. We have, local events that are run by other areas of our local government who do events that we also work at and do these sorts of activities. And we've been doing a lot of activities recently in reserves that are about increasing people's confidence in spending time in them. So those ones are deliberately that we're doing in some various reserves around as well. But yeah, most of the work that my team does is at the centres, but then we've also got a sub team that does school programs. So they also do incursions, so excursions and incursions. Yeah.
Sorry, my question.
Oh, is that my question? Cool.
So where are these people?
I'm trying to like low-key avoid saying it, but it's Brisbane City Council. So I work at their Karawatha, so Karawatha Forest on the south side in Logan, Boondall Wetlands on the north side, just near the airport, and Chermside West, where Downfall Creek Bushland Reserve is, Bushland Centre is. Yeah, so those are the 3 council ones.
So when you go to Tui Forest, that's something different.
That's something different, yeah. So now and then we will run those sorts of programs that are out in different reserves, yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. So with your kindy programs, are you guys the ones that then set that up for the individual kindies in their local areas as well?
It depends. So Bush Kindy is one that we run and it's just for anyone in the community to come along to, but sometimes we will have kindergartens themselves come along and we'll request like, oh, hey, we're visiting, can you come and chat with us? And so we'll do that sort of ad hoc activity as well. But the Bush Kindy, it's kind of a misnomer because it's not actually with a specific kindy, it's just with kindy age children just of the public in general. Yeah. Our last presenter for this evening is the wonderful Mick Law, Mohammed's back again. There we go. He's been at the forefront of geospatial education for over 20 years now and is very well known amongst the community. And we're very honoured to have him speak to us tonight. The floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mick. That's the former version of me many, many years ago. I'm an educator, so I work with students, secondary school students. I'm a geography teacher. I started out at Ferny Grove and at Brisbane Grammar, and I switched across. An opportunity came up at Esri Australia to work with, to manage their GIS in schools program. So I took the plunge and left the education system for a while, and I enjoyed that. But I thought, well, one of the common problems I had, or common problems teachers had, were at the time was we were using ArcView. If anyone remembers those days, John's curled up in a ball in the back of the room there. And it was very difficult bit of software for teachers to use. And so I'd go to conferences and events and teachers would all say, the person at our school who knows how to run this software has left and we can't use it. So that inspired me to start my own business, which is Contour Education. And the goal there was really just to kind of simplify everything for teachers and make it as easy as possible to use geospatial, and Contour Education still ticking along. But in the meantime, I have worked at the Department of Natural Resources, mines. I think we were energy and possibly water as well at the time I was there. And I ran there. We had a GIS in schools program there that I was working on. And most recently, I've stepped back into the classroom, which only actually happened last term. And I'm now working at Brisbane South State Secondary College. So yeah, I'm really focused in on that kind of secondary education level, and I've been working in that space for roughly 20 odd years now. So, and as you can see there, it's sort of from a few different angles. So I've been able to kind of hopefully get a good, broad view of that space, geospatial and education. In terms of my relationship with geography, that image you can see there in the background is Ferny Grove State High School. And from my own personal journey, I guess I better start there before I get into the image. I had a similar to you, Amelia. I had a kind of strange occurrence in senior school, and I ended up in a geography classroom. As it happened, the teacher was fantastic and really inspired me, and I suppose made me appreciate the environment, as a concept a little bit more broadly than I had to that point. So for me, geography, at the end of my school career, it became obvious that this was an important subject and one that I wanted to pursue, which I did. I think the subject of geography is incredibly useful for students, but particularly the geospatial aspect. So when we're looking at, that third dot point there when I'm talking about its relevance, whenever you're dealing with students or whenever you're talking to students and they're considering where they're going to go in their future, if geography is on the table, often those discussions can move towards, is this going to get me a job? And unfortunately, that's, a sad reality of, I suppose, our world these days. But students are very much thinking about how this particular subject might help them, get a job out there in the real world. And geography, I think, is a really relevant subject because probably preaching to the choir a little bit here, but it's a really relevant subject because it's, it affects everything that we do. And I think that whenever that fact sort of became apparent to me, it was really a point that I wanted to share with people around me. So yeah, geography for me has always been, at least when I got into secondary school, has always been a subject that I've loved and I've wanted to kind of share. And that's sort of led me eventually into becoming a teacher. As I say, the image there is Fanny Grove State High, and I was very fortunate at the time to have a really supportive head of department. And we ran a subject in year 10 called GIS. This is a few years ago now. But we called it GIS, and the culminating project for our students, this was a year 10 subject, was to actually create a map about an issue that related to something in their life. So one of the groups decided to look at litter around the school, and we divvied the school up into a grid. They went out and counted the rubbish, and we created a very simple choropleth map. And so that's the kind of thing we were looking at achieving in year 10. Just getting students an idea that this is a tool that you can use that can help you go out and solve some problems and address some issues. And yeah, that's sort of the model I guess I've taken forward, is that to me geospatial, whenever I'm promoting geography, geospatial is a tool, like an atlas that we can use to help us address and solve issues out there in the world. In terms of engaging with young people through geography, I think the subject itself has changed quite a lot. So the subject of geography in classrooms has changed quite a lot. The national curriculum came about in Australia in 2013. And so rather than having 7 or 8 different kind of state curricula, we now have a national curriculum. And that curriculum is really focused on, while it still includes, your traditional geography, your physical and human geography, they're big parts of the curriculum. The curriculum itself is more focused around different issues that students can expect to see. So in primary school, they might be looking at their local place, the world around them. We might be looking at things like some of the hazards that students might see. Moving into secondary, we cover a huge range of topics, from place to hazards to landforms and landscapes. We have a unit in year 7 that looks at water. We look at hazards around water as well as how we use and value water. And so all of these issues, I think, are a really good vehicle for us as teachers and educators to be able to kind of share the benefits of geography to students, because we can do it in a context that students, is meaningful for students. Geospatial has been my passion since university, since I actually did some summer work with ERA, the mining company. They handed me these geologist maps and gave me very basic instructions on how to digitize them. And I had no knowledge at all of geospatial technology. So I did that. I went through that process that summer. The following semester, I picked up a GIS subject at uni, and it all kind of fit for me. And so for me, as I've mentioned, the geospatial, as well as being a great tool that we can use to, visualize data and, represent data that students have collected and analyze that data and address issues and problems. These tools are relevant to students, and as I mentioned, some of those conversations do tend to go down to the careers and jobs that students might get out of a subject like geography. And it's good to be able to show them a tool that, or an industry really, that students can take themselves into and go and change the world and solve those issues and address those problems. So I've found those 2 points really are the kind of big selling points when it comes to students. And I should also say, as educators, as teachers, we're not just, students aren't our only kind of market, if I want to use that term. We're thinking about parents as well. And in many respects, we're thinking about other teachers. When I'm putting together resources for teachers as contour education, the students aren't the issue. They'll pick up the software really quickly. There'll be no issues there. It's the teachers there are the gatekeepers, and so you have to kind of make sure that you're presenting resources in a way that teachers can see it as achievable, so that they can then take it into the classroom and use it with their students. But yeah, that's kind of, I guess, my philosophy in terms of engagement with geography and geospatial. It's really keep it simple, address real world issues, and whenever I can, I plug geospatial tech because it's a great technology. As I mentioned, I've just come on board at Brisbane South, and Brisbane South, if you don't know it, we're in Dutton Park. We only opened in 2020, and so every year we're rolling out a new cohort. So we're only up to year 9 now, and I've been brought on to help with help establish the senior geography program there. So next year we're doing year 10, and again, very supportive administration and head of department. So I've been able to get a year 10 subject called geospatial technologies up and running in the school. We brought that out to a few parent nights, information nights last term. And there was a lot of genuine interest from parents and students about, what is this about? How do these tools work? Where will they take me? And so it's really great to be able to, answer those questions and say, look, there is a meaningful pathway here for you into a career. 15, 20 years ago, I remember a student saying, well, there are no one is called a geographer. No one does that job out there in the real world. Well, there are some people, but sure, most people who do geography don't become geographers as such. But nowadays we've got geospatial tech, and that's a real kind of a nice kind of wedge that we can use to get students into the field. So yeah, that's a little bit about me and what I do. And does anyone have any questions?
Mick, based on your diversity of experience, and Neville and I are interested in connecting geospatial information with history.
Right.
Have you ever, what's your knowledge of or connection with any projects in trying to connect the geospatial world and the historical?
Look, I've seen bits and pieces. I'm sure you're aware of the David Rumsey map collection. Have you come across that one before? So David Rumsey, I'm guessing a fair bit here, but I think he's an American map collector. Put all of his maps online, or at least a substantial amount of them online. Historic maps. And a lot of those he's made available via a sort of GIS platform. So
No. We're into the dynamic GIS. Yes, So this is the problem. I'm a historian,
right,
and this is the problem: the inability to communicate between disciplines.
Yeah,
and we're way beyond sort of static
maps.
That's not what historians do.
No. Well, look, I mean, from in terms of that project, what was really good was they put them onto a 3D globe, so that was very appealing and eye-catching. And a lot of the maps, there's a lot of historic city maps, so you can go in and look at a historic map of Tokyo and compare that to the real world. So there were a few little features within his little GIS platform that I think were useful in that regard. But look, in terms of how I've seen it used historically from a history perspective, to be honest, not very often. You'll get maps of the Roman Empire over time, that kind of thing, the Silk Road, etc., etc. But I am yet to see a really good project based in a school from a predominantly historical viewpoint that's using geospatial.
And it's intuitive from our point of view, but it seems that there's a lot of community groups around Brisbane that are interested in their areas.
Mm.
And we see the potential to try and use some geospatial setting to be able to sort of, it's a common
Deliver that
denominator
data.
that may not cause too much conflict in the sense that it's a platform that everyone could possibly,
Yeah.
you know, buy into.
So you're thinking local historical data being made available for people in that area. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, connecting. So today we did a presentation here about the history of Spring Hill. And we had some static maps, but if we were able to start to access information in a geospatial sense and put some layers there, it starts to bring the history alive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, look, as I say, those historic maps of Tokyo and San Francisco, etc., they're great because you can kind of fade the historic map down and see the current map and then bring them. So it does let you compare that change over time. But yeah, there's a lot of potential there. I do. It's, you know, probably the thing holding it back is there's just not too many people with a history background who are familiar with geospatial. a very rare man.
Yeah, and over time we might be able to get a project going at a school to start to make some connections.
Yeah, well, certainly be open to that, for sure.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much.
Else? Giselle?
So you mentioned this, the attempt of putting together a lot of the physical and human, I guess, traditional geography focuses, I suppose, in education, but you mentioned they're also looking at like real world issues and topical issues. Are there any issues that are being put into that subject that you're like really excited about looking into with geospatial tech?
Well, before I answer that, so just to give you a quick overview of the curriculum, they do tend to still follow that physical and human geography. So in primary school, they do 1 unit of geography per year, whereas in high school they do 2, and in the kind of 7 through to senior, they'll do 1 human and 1 physical geography unit, kind of 1 predominantly human and 1 predominantly physical geography. So for year 10, the 2 units, one of them is well-being. So we're thinking about development there. That obviously your human geography, and the physical geography is a bit open-ended. It's environmental change and management. So with the physical geography unit, we are doing the geography of surfing. And we're going down to the Gold Coast. We're going to be looking at the World Surfing Tour. They have an event on there every year. So we'll be taking a field trip down and we'll be sort of auditing the event just to look at its impact on the environment. And I'm still finalising the assessment, but I'm thinking it will probably be a hypothetical where the event has to move and students need to pick a new location and then justify why they would choose that location. So yeah, hopefully lots of good geography happening and geospatial.
There's a lecturer at the Sunshine Coast University called Amelia. He teaches a subject called geography of surfing.
Oh, fantastic. Javier Leon.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll hold on. Yeah, please, that'd be good.
Yeah, the question I was going to ask you was the students at BSSS, do they do the geography competition?
I don't. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm actually not sure because I only started there in term 3.
Okay.
But they will be doing it next year.
Hey, John, our number
There you go. Yes, add a 1 to you. Yeah. So, thanks everyone.
I'm going to invite our 3 speakers. I know we've had a little bit of Q&A in the room, but I'm going to invite the 3 up to have a seat on these lovely chairs. For those of us who are online, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. This is your opportunity to ask our lovely panelists some questions. While we're waiting to see if there are any questions from online, I'll open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions in general for our panel or specifically that come to mind after their presentations, we've got a burning question down the front here. Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm known, people that know me, for the meta reflection. I go for the big picture because that's what we're failing in education. We're failing in the big picture. So that for each year in different contexts, what are the policy challenges challenges in terms of what you're doing in making community engagement? All three.
What was, can you repeat the question?
What are the policy challenges? And you're representing council.
Oh, well, I'm not. I'm not. That's the whole thing. I'm not in uniform. All
No.
my opinions are my own.
That's fair enough. But the context is council. We've got secondary education, we've got council, and we've got
No.
the big
Non-profit.
picture of geography in the country.
You've got curriculum.
Yeah, the larger curriculum. Yeah. But I'm interested, you know, because Neil's talked, and what Neil and I are trying to do is really severely coming up against the, you know, in the policy challenges council, the Queensland Education Department, you know. So yeah.
I can jump in if you guys want to think.
Yeah,
Because I haven't answered this one. So there's probably a couple there. One, for us as educators, we've overcome one of the biggest things. And when I mentioned the national curriculum coming in 2013, that mandated, the first time it mandated the use of geospatial tech in the curriculum. So up until that point, it was not mandated, suggested, recommended, teachers should, etc. And what you would get there is, you know, as I mentioned when I was with Esri, that the teacher, we know how to use this software, has gone. You get that one passionate educator who would learn how to use ArcGIS or how to put up at uni. Whereas nowadays it's mandated, so everyone's. So I've seen a huge change in terms of uptake. Now we're not getting, doesn't necessarily mean every teacher out there who's teaching geography. It doesn't mean that they're doing a high level in costs, spatial technologies, etc. But it means that everyone has to use some sort of geospatial tools. So I think that's been a big win for us. You know, seeing kind of, rather than having 1 out of 10 staff members knowing what GIS is or geospatial is, everyone now knows what geospatial is to varying degrees. Specifically in Queensland, we do have one particular issue, and that is that we have unique privacy legislation, particularly around children. So it's meant that the Queensland government is quite restrictive in terms of what it gives students access to. So for many years, and I probably will still send a few emails off every now and then, the Queensland government has blocked access to a lot of really great introductory geospatial tools. So one of the ones I've loved for years is Google's My Maps, and it's basically Google Maps, but you sign in and you can create your own maps. You can import data that's by table, so you can do some really basic geospatial using Google Maps. And of course, the education department block that. So in Queensland government schools, they are simply banned from getting access to some of those tools. Other tools, you'll be stunned to hear this, but there is a rather laborious process of getting particular sites unblocked or getting access to particular sites that require signing. So kind of that bureaucratic stuff is a bit of a barrier. But yeah, the big one in terms of mandating the use of these tools in the curriculum has been overcome. Really good benefits.
Thank you.
And it should probably be noted that geography has one of the highest rates of out of discipline teachers of all subjects in the Australian curriculum.
About half of people in Australian classrooms who are teaching a geography class are actually not trained geographers. So when I put my contour education hat on and I'm developing resources for teachers, that's something I have to be really on.
Right, so that might go to the policy, education policy issue, which I have written lots of emails to the Queensland government about their inability to think through multi-discipline education. They're complete fools in terms of multidisciplinary education. And we've had it with Griffith University since 1975, and still we've got bureaucrats and politicians that are as thick as brick on that.
Well, as an employee of the Department of Education,
perhaps. But yeah, I mean, look, and that bureaucracy is never going to go away. So little victories like getting it mandated in national curriculum.
If you're all right for me to jump in, because I tie into that a bit. So something for us working with is the fact that the national curriculum is actually changing. And so for us, it's making sure that we're working on the correct curriculum that we're trying to tie into for all of the schools to make sure that we are relevant. But as Mick was saying with EQ in particular, with being able to access both certain sites and also emails. One of the things that we struggle with is email communication to schools because of all of the blocks and firewalls that can be there. So even though I have the details of a teacher who I'm emailing directly, I may not be able to get through to them because of that. And when we were looking at platforms to go on the online journey with, that was also another big thing, and being able to make sure that the schools could actually access the platform for students to both log in, but also see all of the content. So for us, something that we have decided to do is that anything that we put into the competition, so as I said, we're no longer just an image, we can be GIFs, we can be whatever we want to be, but the competition has taken the decision that we will not link through to the likes of YouTube or Google, because schools will have the firewalls there that they can't access that. So anything that we have, we actually have the file itself that's embedded into the platform so that they're just looking at that platform, which we've gotten permission for them to be able to access in that school. The other thing that we're having to work with is, and I'm a little bit hazy, I can't remember, it was a while ago that I dealt with it. The Department of Education or equivalent in Western Australia now have this form, for want of a very simplistic description for it, that any external provider of the department that wants students to access a platform like we do has to go through and provide information both about the platform itself, who we are as an organisation, and because the student data is going to be on there that is identifiable at the time, but then of course is de-identified afterwards. But all of that has to be recorded, and it is actually becoming something that all of the states and federal government are building together to be able to determine different organisations through the different states and federally that are using student information and how it's being used. So that's something also that we are very open and clear with all of that, but we're having to work into the policies as they change as far as student data is concerned.
I feel like I have something to add, but it's hard to say. So I'll just say, reiterating that I represent my own opinion, and no one else's. I'll just say that I think for where we work a lot with the community and we work on the ground and we observe and see certain things happening, it can be hard because there are certain stances that we are allowed to take and there are certain stances that we're not allowed to openly take. And I find that a bit challenging sometimes, especially with this background as a geographer, and having this understanding that things need to come from a bigger point of view, from a larger scale, and taking into account these large scale changes and the fact that, you know, we have to be sustainable. We have to think of our future people who are going to be living in Brisbane. And I think that that's sometimes a bit tricky because while some of our team might have certain takes, we're not allowed to represent those stances while we're at work. So I think that can be a bit tricky sometimes because it's that thing where I might like to say to someone, this is really important, you need to not do this. That might not necessarily be what I'm allowed to do. So I think that's definitely a bit of a challenge as well. I think as well, with people now being able to get their information from anywhere and everywhere, it's really hard for us to stay both relevant and to fight against misinformation. I think that's a really big challenge for us at the community centre, at the environment centres, is that we are trying to fight against all these other forms of media that are potentially more interesting than we are. And I think that can be a bit tricky as well, because again, we're, for example, not allowed to have our own social media. We're not allowed to have our own Facebook or Instagram or any of those things. So we can't compete with these other alternative sort of spaces when what we're trying to do is build a safe space for people to come and find out those answers for themselves. But yeah, so I think that's potentially a challenge that we work through.
Well, you know, I have written to the Lord Mayor and I've told him that his policy is unintelligible It is unintelligible on the basis of philosophy, and Neil and I are both philosophers. There are no philosophers that would support that policy position. I think there would be most political scientists would not support that sort of policy. This is in terms of the academia, and I was a higher education policy researcher for over a decade. The academy will not support the policy of the Brisbane Council is insanely unintelligible.
And all I can say is really just no comment, but
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
can talk to you later more as me.
I'll comment for you.
What policy are you actually talking about?
I think the inability for professionals to speak, like geography
yes,
is,
okay, yeah.
to be able to speak to their discipline
Yeah.
fully.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah, and that is just untenable in a democracy.
That's right.
It's untenable under
Yeah,
a democracy,
yeah.
you know? So it's just insane.
You
So
have to toe the corporate line.
Exactly, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, yeah.
And in
there's certain
practical
things.
terms, Pamela,
Yes.
for example, if I want to speak to someone about Spring Hill, the entity of Spring Hill, there's no one in the council I can speak to because they have been limited in the task that they're responsible for. And so if they're an assessment officer in the building section, if they're in the park section, all of these things, they aren't in a position to talk to you about a geographical place.
Yep, I understand.
So they become completely program-based, where in fact, most organisations try to get this balance between program and place. So you might have a sales force that might focus on, some people do computers and some people do TVs, but usually you also have a territory where someone brings those things together. And unfortunately, the council has lost its geography.
Interesting take. It's got very philosophical very quickly. Thank you. We don't have any further questions from online. I think we've lost a lot of our online participants. So I might just say we'll maybe go for like 5 more minutes of questions from the floor. Does anyone else have a burning desire to ask?
What's the thing that keeps you coming back to it every day?
That's also very philosophical.
I know. What's the thing that brings you joy? Each of the else. Nothing. Oh God.
I can start.
I need another 4 days to prepare my answer.
No, I'm happy to start. So for me, I come from a background of a very high-paced environment, working across multiple continents in one day is what I was used to for close to 10 years. And then due to being someone with a young family, just couldn't do that anymore. You know, starting your day when you're talking to Los Angeles all the time on their time zone and finishing your day talking to Abu Dhabi on their time zone and everything in between, couldn't do that anymore. So I decided to look for something that still gave me variance in what I did each day, variance in what happened week to week and month to month. And I do that because I have a real cycle as far as how my year plays out. But it also still really challenges me in the differences that happen. I have certain things that happen, you know, week in, week out, or month in, month out, or year in, year out at the same time, and other things are completely different. So I love that there's always that change in what's happening. So for me, it's the variation in my role that makes it, you know, what I want to come back to all the time, because, you know, there's some days as a mother of young children, there's some days where I have not had much sleep at all, as you can see right now. And so knowing that I can just, you know, have the day where I just do what I need to do because I know what I need to do to get through it. But then other days where, you know, you look at your clock and it's 8 a.m. and then you look at it again and it's 6:10 at night because you've just been on the go all day. My role offers me that sort of variation between. So I love that. All the people I get to chat to all the time. So, yeah.
I'm going to play off that, and I totally agree. My role is super, super fluid, which is awesome, because I was getting a bit bored when I first joined the program. I worked in the policy branch a little bit, and they're fantastic and super enviro nerds, which is great. But I just got a little bit bored of doing a lot of like policy heavy stuff. And I like talking to people. I like building connections, and I like, I guess, bonding with people over their passions. So we come to sort of a mutual place where we're safe to learn new things together. And I really like the way that the environment centers provide that for me, for my team, and for the people who come to visit. So, and I'm just learning stuff all the time. I feel like all the time I'm learning more and more stuff that I wouldn't be able to bring myself to sit down and read about and learn. And even though I like study and I really enjoyed that when I was studying, I can't now. It's so hard to get yourself once you don't have like a specific purpose for doing something, really hard to find the motivation to just learn something for the sake of learning it. Whereas I find that learning it for other people, I can do that easy, like, or learning for it so that me and another person can talk about it together and explore it together. I'm happy to do that. So I find that's why I keep coming back.
The heart of an educator.
For me, I love nature and the environment and getting outside. But you know, if you were to look at the mainstream media and look at examples of news stories and items that relate to geography, it is very doom and gloom. Bad news all the time. So being a geography teacher, educator, it gives me an opportunity to, I guess, encourage students towards the kind of positive things that are happening and positive things that can happen, and show students that they actually do have some power to change some things in the world. Not to say that we can all go out and change the world, but you know, we can empower students to make positive changes. I think that as a teacher, when you get to see that happen, is very good. Gets me out of bed. It's hard.
We have a thank you from Ralph Online for the presenters for engaging talks. Do we have any final questions from the floor before we wrap up? Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Anyone still left online and everyone in the room as well. Thank you to our presenters. Can we all give them a round of applause? Before we wrap up for the evening, a little bit of a highlights reel, I suppose, for our next month ahead with upcoming events. If you're a member of RGSQ, our AGM is next week, next Tuesday. You should have got an email somewhere in your inbox about it if you want to register to come along and be part of that whole annual general meeting process and voting process. In terms of our fun events, we have what is this one? A geography and conversation pen, which is like a similar sort of thing. There's a panel and discussion opportunities on Blue Heart, the wetlands project at Yandina, and other carbon sequestration restoration projects. I have to shorten the title there. Coming up in 2 weeks' time on a Tuesday. And our November lecture next month is not the first Tuesday of the month. It's going to be the second Tuesday of the month at the usual 7:30 time slot. All of our upcoming events are on the RGSQ website as usual. And if you're a member or you've signed up to get emails from us, you should get emails coming through when those things are available to register for. That is all for this evening. Thank you all for coming. And we're going to get some food and tea and coffee and stuff out up the back. So feel free to stick around for a little bit, have a chat, get to meet the speakers, get to meet each other. And yeah, thanks for coming.